Good afternoon, folks. Today we're doing our fourth webinar on inquiry in social studies. And my name is Steve Armstrong. I'm the social studies consultant for the State Department of Ed. And today's webinar will be on the fourth dimension of inquiry, which to many folks is actually the most challenging of the dimensions. It's on presenting your argument and taking informed action. And a great deal of our discussion today will be on that part of it, will be on the taking informed action part of inquiry. Our participants today are myself, Dave Basso, who teaches at Berlin High School, Tony Roy from the Connecticut River Academy, John Tully from Central Connecticut State University, and Laura Kranicki from William J. Johnston Middle School in Colchester. And as always on these webinars, if you have questions, please write them into the chat box, or questions or comments. John Tully is here making note of the chat box. So anything you say in the chat box will answer, somebody on the panel will answer the question or respond to your comment. So here we go. And again, any and all questions are welcome. So take it away, folks.
Thanks. This is Laura Kranicki. I'm going to briefly go through the objectives of our webinar this afternoon. First of all, our goal today is to provide an overview of Dimension 4. If you are unfamiliar with the earlier dimensions, 1 and then 2 and 3, they were in earlier webinars, so you may want to go back and see those on the website. We're also going to talk about how skills develop across the grades and looking at the C3 document. And our third objective is to provide a more in-depth look at applying Dimension 4, especially across the content strands, history, geography, economics, and civics, and especially in civics. And in that case, the two parts of Dimension 4, communicating conclusions and taking informed action, will be evident. And our last two objectives, one of them will be connecting to college and university work, and we'll have a review of this by John Tully. And then finally, we'll conclude with some examples of ways that students can apply this dimension in the classroom. Our next slide is going to talk about the overview of the dimensions.
Hi, everyone. This is Tony Roy from, as I was already said, Connecticut River Academy. I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the dimensions. Basically, it's broken down into 4 pieces. Just like Laura had said just a moment ago, you can go back and watch previous webinars to really get the nuts and bolts of each of these, but this is just a quick overview. So we begin with asking questions and planning inquiries, moving over to applying disciplinary concepts and tools. Next would be evaluating sources and using evidence, and then finally communicating conclusions and taking informed action. Next slide, please. All right, what we see here, I mean, I'm not going to go over this in depth, but basically what we see here is the band, I guess you could say, of indicators for communicating. This really has to do with constructing arguments and constructing explanations using evidence and relevant information. And the last one here is in the last row here. Basically, this is presenting your arguments. And then just an example, so from the lowest level from K2, basically you're presenting a summary of an argument. And then all the way up over here to 9 through 12, you're presenting adaptations of arguments and explanations using that feature evocative ideas and perspectives on issues. So as you can see, as you progress through the grades, it gets a little bit more complex. Next slide, please. This next band is really talking about critiquing conclusions. As you can see, it still follows the same K through 2, and then 3 to 5, and 6 to 8, and 9 through 12 setup as the other ones did. And these are really just about critiquing other people's conclusions. Let's just say you're writing an essay. We actually just did this recently in my school, and you know, they're writing an essay, let's say, on the causes of the Civil War. Well, if a student is arguing that slavery was the cause of the Civil War, you know, at one point they should address that, even though some people would say state rights states' rights were the real cause. You know, this is why that person's wrong. So critiquing those conclusions. So really, it really comes down to just acknowledging that there's other arguments that are out there and explaining why those are wrong or sometimes correct. All right, and next slide, please. And the last one here that we're looking at is taking informed action. You can see that even for the earliest grades, K through 12, we're expecting that students can take informed action. A lot of times it's right in the classroom. We'll get into this a little bit more in depth later on. But again, I just want to show that this goes across the band, and as they move up through the grades, progress through the grades, the tasks become more and more complex. So we encourage you to check out the college and career readiness frameworks and also the Connecticut Social Studies frameworks for high school and elementary education, which you can find on the State Department website. Next slide, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is David Basso from Berlin High School. Thank you for joining us. So the goal here is to get into obviously more specifics and nuts and bolts about how some of these concepts can be applied practically. And one way to think about this is to look at the quote there right from the C3, which of course provides guidance to individual states as they consider what their standards will be like. And of course, Connecticut was very much at the vanguard of putting together its state frameworks, and that's why we have these webinars presently. And so the idea would be is that at the end of the inquiry arc, that students have the capacity and the skills and the resources, et cetera, to be able to communicate conclusions and to take informed action. One of the important things to remember about this is that this can take many, many different forms and different degrees of time and intensity and action in various venues, as Tony just mentioned, in the classroom, but also beyond. And so part of the goal of creating informed active citizens would be to prepare our students to communicate those conclusions after an inquiry and then doing something with them. And so some considerations, some overall broad considerations to keep in mind related to this would be in thinking about ways that students can communicate conclusions and take informed actions, how relevant is it? Does it have a connection? Is it meaningful to their lives and to current events or what have you? How current is it? The degree of currency. Great memorable activities will involve some degree of universality, where it's perhaps thematic in nature or it addresses an enduring issue or an enduring dilemma, and we know that much of what we teach is replete with those. And that leads to the next one, the idea of enduring qualities. There are many issues that are not time or generational or regionally specific, but that are broad and have those enduring qualities. One of the big shifts that we've had to make with this idea of inquiry is that there's a certain degree of letting go. It's the goal is for our students to be interdependent and independent, and so much of many of these outcomes or products or assessments, whatever they might be, should have some degree of student-driven quality about them. Most certainly in doing so, that will increase the level of engagement. Anybody who's done even some minor degree of inquiry in their classroom probably has seen that the level of engagement from students increases dramatically. Another thing to consider is the degree of impact. It might be on students' individual lives, it might be in the classroom, it might be in the school community, and beyond. How much of an impact might it have on various aspects of the school culture and community culture, or in some cases, it might even be state and national culture and beyond. Obviously, the practical considerations would be the amount of time and the resources and our overall capacity to implement certain activities that allow students to communicate conclusions and take informed action. And another thing would be, does it have a certain community orientation? And that community can be defined in any number of ways, from a classroom all the way to a global classroom. Next slide. And so some other things to think about, and part of the reason why Stephen mentioned earlier on that this is often one that's quite a challenge, is I think many teachers are looking to implement something that is going to be earth-shattering and a major project, and it doesn't have to be. And so the idea would be that the development of skills, especially civic skills, is a progression. First grade students might be looking more at something such as developing class rules, whereas seniors in high school might be applying some of these ideas and skills to a capstone project that's necessary for graduation. We're not asking students to change the world in one class period, but most certainly there is the potential in some ways when we think of whether it's project-based learning or design thinking. Those certainly can have much larger ramifications beyond the classroom. Of course, projects, whatever they are, and perhaps project's not even the right word, but whatever the activity is or whatever the outcome is, needs to be developmentally appropriate. And of course, as educators, we know that. We certainly want to be able to make it manageable, that is practical, and it's easy to implement, but it can be something that's meaningful and relevant to the curriculum, to the students, and to departmental needs, to school needs, and so forth. And a lot of the work certainly takes place, like any good lesson, a lot of the work takes place on the front end so that students are able to, under your expert guidance, be able to expand out into their research, into their inquiry, learn new things, and apply those new things to new situations. So that most certainly would enhance and engage our students rather than preventing them or limiting them in some ways. Next slide.
All right, this is John Tully. I've been asked to talk a little bit about the college and university perspective on inquiry in general, and specifically ways that communicating Dimension 4, communicated conclusions and taking informed action fits into that. Before I get started, though, I just wanted to take a moment to see if any of our attendees had any questions or comments, either about how this will help prepare their students for higher education, or something that we've already talked about. So we'll take just a quick 30 seconds or so. Just go ahead and type it into the chat, and I'll be sure that one of us has a chance to address it. Feel free if something comes up to go ahead and type that in, but I'll just kind of move on while we're waiting. You know, one of the things that Steve has been finding as he's been going around the different districts, and we've seen it a little bit as well in some of our professional development, the workshops that we've had, is some teachers are still concerned that if there's an inquiry process in their classroom, and if they don't continue to try to work the way they've been doing things to make sure their students have a deep kind of content knowledge and readily accessible set of historical or social studies facts that they can memorize and call upon, that somehow they're not being ready for higher education, where they need to kind of sit and take notes. And if there is that feeling out there, I want to dispel it. Really, we're seeing at the university level, in my classes and across the discipline, this set of inquiry skills being very, very important. And we want students to be able to be historical thinkers, or to think like a geographer or an economist or a political scientist. And a large part of that is being able to communicate their conclusions in ways that those fields do that. That process is developing across the discipline, and it's several different pressures, I think, or opportunities which are allowing that to happen. Unfortunately, we're seeing some enrollment issues, and that's having us rethink a lot of the way we kind of present history. And I think the other thing that's been real important is certainly the development of the internet over the last 10, 15 years. No longer do we in higher education feel the need to, in the same way that should be happening in the secondary, is to be sure that our students have a lot of facts for simply the knowledge of facts and the retention of those. You can get that on your phone in 20 seconds, but what you can't get is that ability to understand that information and to make sense of it, which is so much more important as our students move on to be citizens. So what's driving some of this change in higher education? Well, I think some of the work at Sam Weinberg, who's out at Stanford, the Stanford District Education Group has done that. I think his faculty members have been participated in the Teaching American History projects. We're now seeing that the whole way of thinking about pedagogy at the higher education level has been changing. Right now, almost all the major journals have teaching sections which would have been impossible to even think about just 10 years ago. So this process of having your students at the K through 12 level work on communicating their conclusions, thinking about taking informed action, where they begin to see the social studies as an active part of what it means to be a citizen, will prepare them to do well in college and will certainly prepare them to do well as citizens. So Steve, next slide.
Before we go that, could I ask you, or could I ask somebody on the panel to address the issue that I asked? Does every inquiry have a taking informed action piece? I'd be curious to know what you fine folks think about that.
And this is David Basso. I had considered that communicating conclusions and taking informed action, while they often go hand in hand, are certainly in some cases separate entities or separate acts. And so, in my opinion, all inquiry should lead to some way of communicating the new learning or the result of an inquiry. But students might necessarily act on this new learning. That the act in and of itself might just be the communicating. However, typically what I've seen is that if it's a longer, more sustained or deeper inquiry, that often leads to some sort of action on the student's part, which will have a communicating conclusions component to it.
You know, I could comment on that just really quickly. This is Tony Roy again. I would say that I agree with Dave pretty much 100% on that, and I think that sometimes once you get to the point where you have, not you, the students have communicated their learning, sometimes if it's really good, right? I mean, maybe one way that you could take action is you could, whatever that piece is that you created, maybe it's a video for class, or maybe it's an op-ed, or maybe it's an essay. Maybe what you could do is just submit that to some sort of public venue, and that would actually be taking action. So, I mean, I see where you're going with that, with saying that they are separate, but sometimes taking action is just taking your communication that you've already created and bring it to the public sphere. And I think that that's the one thing I would add to that.
Can I just say very quickly, when I do, this is Steve, when I do professional development activities, and we talk about this in districts, what I always tell them is I could be wrong on this, but my message is that do taking informed action when it's appropriate. That I think sometimes people almost force taking informed action onto an inquiry and it doesn't quite work. So my message that I try to give out is to do it when it's appropriate, but don't try to force it on when it's not appropriate.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right, Steve. I think that's a good way of looking at it. So what we're looking at here is taking informed action. These are just the indicators, kind of just broken down into the three real main things that you do for these. So taking informed action is split across the three indicators. At all levels, we are asking students to identify problems within their classroom, schools, communities, nation, and the world. They are also asked to determine the challenges and opportunities associated with these problems, right? So the first taking informed action piece, as by the first indicator, is literally just identifying problems, challenges, and opportunities. The next indicator talks about once problems have been identified, we're asking that students assess the options for taking action. In early grade, students will work to identify ways to affect change. By high school, we're asking that students engage in self-reflection, complex causal reasoning, and strategy identification to address the problem. And then finally, the third indicator, the final indicator in this section, asks students to use deliberative and democratic strategies such as listening, consensus building, voting, assembly, to make decisions and take action. So if you really think about it, you know, the part that everyone thinks about taking action is that, you know, walking up to the state house with a protest sign, or going out and voting, or participating in some sort of demonstration, I guess you could say. But really, if you look at the indicators for what they actually say, the first two are really about identifying problems and assessing options, and then finally the third one is where you would take that action in classroom, schools, and out of school civic context. So you can go on to the next slide, please. You know, and then just a little bit on the context for action. Really what we're looking at here is that in the earliest grades, it's expected that that action will take place within the classroom. Some examples include the process of developing and adhering to classroom rules, procedures, and roles for students. By grade 5, we're hoping that the action takes place in both the classroom and the school. This might include participating in community building activities, or sponsoring a can or bottle drive. And then finally, by middle and high school, we envision students moving beyond the walls of their school and taking action within the community or at the global stage. In addition to attending town hall meetings or voting, I could see students submitting an op-ed to the local paper, reaching out to an elected official, and attending or organizing a rally. You know, and just because they're in the middle school and high school level doesn't mean they can't take action within their school walls or within the classroom walls. These are just the context for action. Action can happen at all of these different levels. And this goes back, this last little star at the bottom goes back to what I was saying earlier about communicating in a public setting constitutes taking action. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide, please.
So at this point, we're going to take a little bit of time to pause and get some feedback, and as best as possible in a virtual setting to have a bit of interaction. So something we'd like you to think about is an area within your curriculum, whatever your professional setting is, where you are considering inquiry, where there might be a logical spot for students to take informed action along the lines that Tony elaborated upon. We'd like to hear a little bit about why you would choose this topic. Again, it might be for practical matters. It might be something that is particularly engaging to students. It might be something that's relevant and current. And some ideas, and we'll certainly get into more ideas, but what type of informed action will students take? And so this is a great point for us to pause, and it'll be quiet for a little bit, but we would ask that you type up some of your thoughts into the chat box.
Is there any questions that we should be addressing before we go on to the next slide? Please go ahead and post those in the chat box, and we can take a look at those. Okay, so following up with Dave's discussion about curriculum considerations, It's interesting to find out how students can recognize needs in the community. And the community can be quite narrow. It could be as small as the classroom, or it could be a global community. But these are some questions that would be important not only for the teachers to be considering when thinking about developing an informed action or communicating conclusions for an inquiry. So let's take a look at some of these. On the left it says, which questions are we asking? As a teacher, are our questions that we ask students truly inquiry? And do they promote looking at ways of communicating a conclusion or taking informed action? To tie in with this, what kind of questions are the students asking? Are they asking questions that promote those? How about our expected outcomes? This goes back to looking at assessments and maybe even some common rubrics. Are there uniform assessments that we can look at across inquiries that may help us with guiding this discussion? And then moving on, connected to that one, are these type of assessments or are these outcomes valid and adaptable over time? And I think this is an important piece because some things that may be valid now or even historically may not be valid in the future. And this ties back to the skills that students have of either thinking like historians, geographers, or political scientists, and how students therefore are communicating these conclusions. This may be a good spot to stop and think with your own district. How are these questions being addressed not only in your classroom, but district-wide? And when this conversation has continued, you might want to move on to the next slide.
Okay, so this is an example from my school. We have civics in the 10th grade, and a couple of years ago, I think probably about 4 years ago, when the C3 first came out, our department kind of jumped on the option of trying to incorporate as much action into our civics class as possible. So we came up with this civic engagement portfolio. If you look down at the bottom, there's actually, you can click on that link, or you can copy that link, or whatever you need to do, and you can actually go directly to the rubric. It's got, basically, it just lays out everything that we assess on it. I won't go too much into it, but I'll give you an overview of the project. So basically, we ask the students at the beginning of the semester to choose actually 2 issues that are really, really important to them. We have them research those issues. They look up like 2 news articles for each issue, and they basically do a little bit of an analysis of that. They interview people that they know about each of the issue, and then finally they create a choice justification. They write up a little piece about, you know, what choice what is the issue, who does it affect, and finally why is it so important to them. And then what we do is we have them go through with figuring out, well, what impact can I make? So they do a little more research about the issue, and then finally they go ahead and make a proposal for an action plan. They come up with a community resource guide, which is basically who are the people in various government and non-governmental offices that you could contact to make an impact. And all along they keep a progress log. And then finally, by the end, they actually put their action plan into action, and they evaluate their impact. And the way that we grade the students actually isn't based on how much impact they make or whether or not they make impact, but really it has to do with the evaluation of their implementation. You'll see under portfolio presentation, it says implementation evaluation, and basically they have to use evidence and artifacts to prove whether or not they made impact or did not make impact. And then finally, the last piece is of the communication of the action, the issue, the action, and the outcome, which comes at the very end of the semester. You know, just a little highlight. So a couple of years ago, I think it was, let's see here, I think it was 2013, I think, and we were doing this project, and a student of ours whose parents were immigrants, she basically was kind of upset about the way that immigrants are treated in the media, and you know, she was, you know, and also, you know, maybe a couple things about you know, immigration from other countries. I'm not trying to give too much details, but anyway, so she wrote a letter to her congressman, and she didn't get anything back for because in the first 2 months, and then finally 2 years later, of course it was an election year. 2 years later, she gets a letter back from the congressman's office with like a whole position statement on the issue. And again, of course, it was an election year, and at the end, it was like, oh, well, I hope you come out and vote for us. So anyway, she came to me that was in sophomore year that she did the project, and then she came to me senior year with like, oh, look at this, I got this letter back. I was like, wow, that's impact. You wrote your letter and you sent it out, and you got a response back. And she was like really, really excited about that. So that's one example. Another example that students do is they work on issues like bullying within the school, or they might work with different issues related around justice or income inequality, whatever they're really interested in, and strike a passion for them. Because the real purpose of the whole thing is to get their feet wet about what it is to actually do something within your community, right? Because that's what the civic life part is all about. That's what the C3 is all about. That's what the Connecticut Frameworks is all about. Is about that getting out there and actually trying to do something, or at least participating in some way, and having the wherewithal to do that, and to be able to feel confident and competent enough to go ahead and approach your elected leaders or members of your peer group to go ahead and try to affect some kind of change, or at least just be civically engaged.
Sorry, Tony. And for some folks, isn't that indeed the very heart of social studies? I mean, to some folks, this is what gets people incredibly excited about the C3 and the taking this. To some people, to repeat myself, this is what social studies is all about right here, right what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with you. It's interesting because, students come into civics already pretty excited about civics just because it's the topic. And, or at least maybe not excited, but at least open-minded. Let's say it that way, right? So then when we say, well, you know what, you're going to pick an issue and you're going to research it and you're going to actually do something about it, then it's like, oh man, the onus is on me. I actually have to do something about this, and I'm going to be graded on whether or not I actually do it, and if I can evaluate how well I did. So I mean, the students really like it. I mean, but I have to be honest, right? So we had to do some massaging, let's say, of the civics curriculum to be able to fit this civic engagement portfolio in here, because there are some days where the students need a work day where they're just like making, I don't know, let's just say making their posters or putting together their website that they're using or whatever, right? So there's some days where we had to, we can't do 6 days, 5 days on how a bill becomes a law, because it would cut out this opportunity to actually do some real action. And that's just the give and take that you have to take sometimes. That's all I have for this slide. So if you want to go ahead and slide on to the next one. So the next question is just a question for the audience here, or for the participants. What does taking informed action look like in your school? Maybe even some of the panelists could chime in on this. Like, what does taking informed action look like in your school, Dave, or in your school, Laura?
I apologize. I had to unmute myself. Yeah, I'm actually glad you brought that up, because there are some examples of things that we may have done in the past that we have now tweaked it to make it so that it's more an informed action. For example, when we used to be studying ancient Egypt, students would write or do research about mummies using new forensic information that's come by looking at ancient things with new modern eyes, and they found new evidence of things that used to have a different outcome. And so the students themselves created an argument using the new evidence, and then wrote letters to Dr. Zahi Hawass, who was a renowned Egyptologist, to let him know what they found from this new evidence. So not only are they communicating a conclusion, but then by therefore writing to somebody who's an expert in the field, they're moving on to the taking informed action.
It's a great example.
And at Berlin High School, most certainly the senior capstone project is a great example of how students take informed action. And so one of the interesting developments that I'm hoping will occur is how might this get tied more into this idea of inquiry. And so it's not certainly social studies doesn't have a monopoly on the capstone project, but without question, there is the use of social studies skills no matter what topics students pursue, whether it's, researching ACL injuries or what have you. There is most certainly something about it that parallels the inquiry arc. And so I think anybody who's at the high school level, thinking not only in your classroom, but also in your school, in your district and community, what sort of kind of real world projects and outcomes might there be as a result of an inquiry project.
All right, cool. Let's move on to the next slide here.
Tony, can I ask you one question? Sorry. Or I ask you or anybody on the panel or anybody listening, can or does taking informed action ever get, in your experience, ever get political? And I know that sometimes teachers are somewhat afraid of that type of thing. What would be your, Dave, Laura, or anybody, what's your suggestion? Should this, especially probably at a high school level, should or does this get political? And how should teachers handle that?
I think it's a great question, and I would say that at the very root of any, I'll just talk about the civic engagement portfolio, just because I'm teaching it right now. I would say that at the root of any issue that you choose, there's going to be some sort of political part to it. And plus, and especially in this case in civics, I think that something being political kind of almost makes sense, and you should be exploring what your political feelings are on something. And my role as a teacher is not to say whether or not I agree or disagree with someone's political views, but more about to say, okay, those are your views. How can I foster learning more about your views and learning more about your values, so you know exactly what you're saying, doing, and thinking and acting on. And I think in some cases, sure, it does get political, but at the same time, I think it depends. Again, I think it depends on the topic. Going back to the one that Laura was just talking about with the Egyptologist. I think that taking informed action doesn't necessarily need to be political, nor should it be. So I think in some cases, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, I think in some cases, yes, being political makes sense, where in other cases it doesn't really fit. I think it depends on the class, it depends on the age level, it depends on the student's background knowledge. There's a lot of things in there. I mean, sometimes people could just get political just because they hear their cousin saying, making comments about something that seemed political, so they're repeating it, right? Or, they're getting political just because, there's a lot of fire behind that and it gets people riled up. But I don't necessarily think that being political in every situation is necessary, nor is it appropriate. So yes and no, I guess it really just depends on what the objectives are of the lesson project or whatever. If someone else could comment, that'd be great.
Yeah, I would add to that as social studies teachers, and obviously being mindful and sensitive of, as Tony said, grade level and background, et cetera. But I think to a large degree, social studies teachers have an obligation to bring to light some issues, especially those related to social injustice. And I think we're doing a disservice if we don't provide a safe and welcoming environment for students to explore those.
Yeah, you're right on the money with that, Dave. All right, I think
one of the folks, and Michelle is one of our attendees has got a little something to say and is offering a suggestion. Michelle, you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, we were just talking here. I'm sitting with a couple of 6th grade social studies teachers, and we're talking about what informed action looks like in our school. And particularly because they're studying world cultures, taking action is probably a little bit hard for us to be thinking about what that looks like. So we definitely do a lot of Socratic circles so that the kids are communicating what they're learning and talking about what the issue is and what possible solutions are. We were talking about the fact that we try to, particularly around that idea of politicalness of things, making sure that students understand that we're talking through the issue and that there's not necessarily a right answer. So we feel like I really like the slide in there where you were talking about the 3 different indicators for taking action, because it made us feel like we're doing a lot of the steps along the way to build to a place where if we went to like the civics project where kids were really independently planning and taking action that resulted in something that we're building steps that would make kids successful.
You know, Michelle, if I could just, Michelle, you know, those are really, really great points that you said there. And what I liked most about that is you identified that we're already doing a lot of this, you know, and that's what I'm finding through this. I've been studying the inquiry art for probably about 2 years now. What I'm finding more and more is that teachers are already doing so much of this in their own practice. And you saying that about taking the steps, I think that's really, really wonderful.
Thanks.
You are welcome. All right, let's move on to the next slide, if we can.
So we had mentioned that one of the things we wanted to do was to provide some kind of more practical, on-the-ground ideas for what taking informed action and communicating conclusions might look like. And these are in no particular order, but keep in mind some of the considerations that were mentioned earlier in terms of time and resources and capacity and just overall relevance, et cetera, developmental stage, and so on and so forth. But just sort of a non-exhaustive list, and what Tony had just mentioned, I mean, we are doing many of these things, I would imagine, already, and it's just a matter of kind of formalizing them as part of that inquiry process, perhaps a little bit more so. So certainly class rules is a great way, no matter the level, it's a great way to get students involved and making their own decisions about their own particular class environment. Debates, plays, performances, anything where students might, for example, convey a historical time period through something that's very creative. I thought of something like a TED Talk, where students might take on an issue and give a 5 or 6 minute TED Talk, maybe even record it. A community walking tour, a fundraiser, Tony had mentioned a letter to the editor earlier. Even things like, you know, taking informed action might be more personal, and you interview an older relative about an earlier time in history. Bringing in or trying different types of foods, mock trial, video production, and the list goes on, and you have it in front of you. But anything that is student-driven creates greater engagement and greater ownership, particularly if, you know, there might be parameters set up so that, you know, the outcome might be similar, but how students get there might be driven by them in a way that's meaningful to them. You know, something like blogging can most certainly reach a much bigger audience if that's something that, using the teacher discretion, you're capable of doing and want to do. And knowing that you're sharing it with a larger community in and of itself has some power. Anything where students, again, are, you know, instead of the teacher, for example, inviting guest speakers, perhaps students come up with a list, or maybe somebody gets Skyped in, you know, asking, Laura mentioned earlier about getting in touch with people in the field. You know, using Twitter would be a way to do that. Using surveys, student design surveys, app design, even if an actual app doesn't come out of it, but the ideas behind the design. All of these things, and I'm sure just those of us here on the webinar can probably come up with another list of just as many, if not more. But again, the goal would be to make it so that it's meaningful and relevant in students' lives. They're applying their new knowledge that's been garnered from an inquiry investigation, and they're communicating it in some way. And you know, what's not on here and shouldn't necessarily be disregarded, but you know, something like a standard assessment that maybe is tweaked a little bit is something that can allow students to communicate conclusions. So for example, I teach mostly world history classes, and my colleagues and I have redesigned our test so that they're still the traditional essay, so to speak, but the questions themselves are the results of the compelling and supporting questions that derive from the beginning of an inquiry investigation, and students are choosing their questions and constructing an argument they've got their thesis statement and their arguments and their evidence. And so it fits that sort of traditional mold, but there's more ownership, and that makes it much more engaging for many students. So obviously the list can go on and on. I know that you must have many, many ideas and other things that you're doing. And so again, it's a matter of not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but taking advantage of what you already have in terms of resources and expertise, et cetera, and shaping it in a way that it is related to domain 4.
All right, looks like we're ready to go to the next slide.
Actually,
oh, my fault, son. My fault, John.
That's fine. No, we had a couple of participants talked about world cuisines. Actually, Steve, could you mute yourself? We had a couple of participants ask about world cuisine and writing and Skyping foreign students, and I thought maybe Laura, could you jump in there?
Yes, I'm happy to. In fact, I did put some notes in the side chat, but for those who can't see that, I'm glad you mentioned that about the food. We actually in our school had a museum of cultures. We were trying to cover the whole world in, grades 6 and 7. So we had a museum of cultures where students got to choose their country, and then when they chose the country, the only thing that we had all mutually agreed on is that in their presentation they had to share where it was. Other than that, all the questions about their countries were produced by the students. And we literally set up boards, trifold boards around the cafeterias, and then they had all agreed that they wanted to know what the foods were like in those places. So students brought in dishes from their countries to go along with the information that they presented. They had to act as ambassadors so that when people went around to go visit the countries, they could ask questions, and they had to be pretty knowledgeable about their places. So hopefully that answers about the food aspect. Of course, they had little signs to say what kind of food was in it in case there were any allergies, but it was a highlight of the 6th grade, I'll tell you. And as far as Skype goes, or Google Hangouts, I think this one is getting to be even more available to schools when we now have better connectivity in buildings. And we're finding that this is an excellent tool because students are really engaged if they can talk to either other students or other professionals about things in their community or in their world. I'll give you another example. This is a personal example. We had done some research earlier this year with the Mystic Seaport, and we had discovered that there were some native whalers that were from Connecticut who were also Mashantucket Pequot. And an interesting story is that one of these whalers ended up settling in New Zealand. So we contacted a school in New Zealand to see if they had any information. Of course, they have quite a strong maritime culture there as well. So the kids actually had some opportunities, even with a 17-hour time difference. We did Google Hangouts twice with a school in New Zealand to talk about some shared learning and some shared projects. So there are some excellent opportunities for that. You just have to look for ways of sharing this knowledge and finding ways of students to communicate with each other and work on shared projects.
Okay, great. So now it's time for you all to get involved. I mean, the people of Connecticut, the teachers of Connecticut. We're hoping that you'll follow the Connecticut Council for the Social Studies on Facebook and Twitter to engage with other social studies educators and to get the latest information on professional development. Also, use hashtag #CTInquiryK12 to share how you and your students communicate and take informed action. Okay, let's go. We're going to hear about some more examples on taking informed action right here. Laura's going to take this up.
Okay, so I hope I didn't speak too quickly on those last 2 points, but there was something else in addition to these examples on the screen. There are some excellent opportunities for things that are happening right in your own community. For example, students know that there are needs in the community, and it would be important to talk about those. So if we presented this as a geographic challenge, where students looked to see what things that they thought were needed in the community. So for example, they found that they needed to have a common play space. There's no like rec fields or things like that. And they also found that there were some like trails, but that there should be some services near the trails. So they brainstormed out what kind of things that they should have in the town and what was needed. They came up with a proposal by looking at open space maps and also looking at real estate that was available, and then proposed to town leaders that some of those things that they thought that the community needed and what they proposed should go in those places. Interestingly, after that meeting, the town leaders, the city leaders, were so impressed with the students' work, and they confided in me. They told the students afterwards, but they confided in me at the time that several of the ideas had actually already been in the works, but they were going to let the students believe that they were the ones that tipped them over and convinced them into making those decisions. So those types of things, not only are students communicating, but they're taking informed action, and then they can find that their ideas do make a difference. In addition, both the president and the first lady are I know students often write to them, but we found that if there's an event that's coming up, maybe the first lady or the president is traveling abroad somewhere, and we can anticipate that in advance. If the students ask about some things that they wanted to know about where they're visiting, you will more often get a reply more quickly. For example, when the first lady went to China last year, the students had asked some questions about her preparing to go to China and what things she was going to learn to get ready to go. And it was very interesting to see how the first lady did a webinar, did a shout out to the kids, talked about the school, and I'll tell you, you could hardly hear the answer because the kids were so excited. So there are even small ways of taking informed action. And on the slide here, you're going to notice a couple of examples. This one, unfortunately, the first one just passed, the deadline passed last week. However, there may be more opportunities for this one. This is on the Connecticut Council of Social Studies, a video competition about why our community is special. And that was an excellent program, and I hope they had a lot of submissions for it. But if it's going to run again next year, or if there will be others in the future, please keep a lookout for it. In addition, my students participated in the worldofsevenbillion.org. The population of the world has just increased to 7.4 billion people, so that causes certain challenges to the world. And this year, the themes were how the population impacts water scarcity, deforestation, and public health. And so the students got to choose one of those, do research on it, and then create a 1-minute video, really like a PSA, that not only addresses the issue of deforestation and the increasing population, but then potential solutions for those problems. Going down, this climate change video contest, this is for older students. This is through the University of Washington. They're working it's for high school students and also for college students. So this ties back to what John was mentioning earlier. The due date for this one is April 4th, so if you have some really ambitious students who want to do some work over the weekend, they could prepare this video contest, and there is a link there that will take you to the information. And finally, on this particular slide, we have, of course, the Gilder Lehrman, is a wealth of information about U.S. history, but there are 3 essay contests that are going on right now. The Dear George Washington one, you can see the grade groupings for these. The Civil War essay contest and the Age of Revolution. So these are things that not only go along with the content that you're probably teaching at those grade levels, but then also having a contest such as these, students feel really invested in doing a really nice job for it. So, of course, you could assess them yourselves, but all of them have rubrics for judging as well. If you have any questions on this one, please feel free to ask in the comments. And I do have on the next slide is just briefly one of the student entries. This is a student, her name is Kelly Goodwin, one of my 6th graders, had done research on the deforestation topic. This is exactly 1 minute long, and I thought if we had the time for it, it would be worth seeing an example of a student making a video for that World of 7 Billion contest. I don't know if you can play that for us. Oh, there may not be sound. Yeah, it may not work for us. Maybe it's coming through Steve's sound. Well, while this is going through, she had, oh, there you go. Well, she had very strong arguments on So she presented at the beginning of that, she presented the challenges of deforestation and then went through with some data to support her argument and then came up with some solutions at the end. There are some additional examples, and I know that Tony has some good ones that he's going to talk about, including the Kid Governor project on the next slide. Thanks for the video.
All right, so while we're waiting for it to go over to the next slide, oh, there it is right there. You know, I wanted to say, Laura, I really liked that video that your student had put together. What grade was that student had done?
Yeah, that's a sixth grade. That's a sixth grade video that was put together, and actually we had over almost 100 videos that were produced by the students.
Wow,
so we actually,
100 videos.
Yeah, we put them all up on our class YouTube page so that the kids could access them from home. Access them, yes, from home.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, sixth grade. Yep.
That's really cool. All right, so I know we're running out of time here. We just have a couple minutes left, and I just wanted to say that here's a sample of ways that you can work out with outside organizations to meet your curricular goals. So the Connecticut's Old State House hosts a statewide election for Kid Governor. This year's Kid Governor is from East Hartford, and her platform is kindness. I know they'll be doing that again the next school year. Also, the Stowe Prize for writing for social justice is awarded annually, but on even years, 2016, 2018, et cetera, the prize is awarded to a student whose writing inspires action. Finally, the Connecticut Fair Housing Center hosts a fair housing poster contest. The poster shown here on the right-hand side is a third-place winner and was created by one of my students. She won a couple $100 and tickets to the organization's annual dinner. So again, these are just some examples of how you can take informed action in your classroom and also work with outside organizations. And you can go to the next slide. Oh, good. Yeah, sure.
Could I ask you, I think I read that you and some of your students are actually going to be presenting some of your stuff at the Stowe House at a workshop in the next couple of weeks. Am I correct?
Yeah, you are right about that. You know, actually, I didn't want to bring this up to, you know, as a proud teacher, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but
bring it up. So talk about.
Just real quick, yeah, so I have 3 students. I have a senior, a junior, and actually a freshman that are going to be going to the Harry Feature Stowe Center next week. I think it's April 7th. It's on like a Wednesday night, I think. And they're going to be presenting about all the different ways that they've taken action through our school. So one of our students does this, did this thing for her capstone. It's called Girl Cot, which is basically a connection with the statewide Girl Cot movement, which is about raising awareness about gender injustice. And she spent the last 6 months working on like a photo gallery, I guess you could say, where girls and women from our school community took pictures without makeup on, and we put those up all over the school, and we had like a reception where parents came, a nice community event, and basically next to the picture we posted little quotes, why are you beautiful with or without makeup, right? And I was the advisor on that, and it came out really great. We have another student, Anna, who's just been like really involved with Rebuilding Together and the Walk Against Hunger, and she's helped us organize that. And then we have another student, Nada, who is just a freshman, and she's like a budding civic engagement activist kind of person who is just working really hard to be involved with things like the Connecticut Youth Forum and the Walk Against Hunger and just different events that we have, community building events at our school. So we're going to be presenting on April 7th. And then just recently, one of our seniors, not involved with this, but was actually just in the newspaper for her capstone project. You may have seen it in the Hartford Courant in the Connecticut section. She was being featured for the work she was doing, writing like a book of poetry and performing a book of her poems and things like that. So anyway, so we have a lot of action, a lot of different types of action that are happening right here at school that we're really, really proud of. And I think that's it for me. We can probably move on to the last slide, which is, are there any questions? And if there aren't any questions, we could go to the last slide. And this link right here, I'm sure Steve will give us a little more information, but basically at the bottom here, if you're interested in checking out any of our archived webinars, you can go right to that link there. You can access them all through the SDE website there. And I don't know, Steve, I'm sure you want to say a couple things.
This is an incredibly informative webinar, and I'm glad Tony, John, Laura, Dave, I think the information that we got from this was absolutely fabulous. So I want to thank all of you and thank the people who listened in. As you know, this webinar, as all the webinars, as Tony said, are archived, and many of you will be getting your own, through your email, will be getting your own invite to listen again if you choose to do that. Our next webinar is on March 29th, excuse me, that's today, is on April 19th, and that webinar is on social studies literacy and the Connecticut Core. So that's the next subject that we're going to tackle. Folks that listened in and participants, thanks an awful lot, and have a good afternoon. Thank you very much.